This is the voice of Bold Business Radio. I am your host, Jess Dewell. We're talking about keeping image stressors in mind today with Scott and Frank. Both have appeared on the show. I will introduce them to you more in a minute. The idea of the conversations to have around this as leaders today is that everything we do, we are on stage for. Everything we do, whether we think people are looking or not, reflect our inner selves. And so what happens when we do one thing in front of people and something else when people are not around, and then we're under stress? We tend to be the way we are when people are not around. It's whatever I would say is more of our typical nature. And yes, that was all Jessica's opinion. So if you have any issues, definitely comment on them and send us an email and tell us what you think. The deal is, it's our discussion, and it's this discussion today that you're going to hear us have that is helping us develop what it means to be a leader today and keeping in mind our stressors and how we react under stress and how we come across in those times is what people think of us and determines, are we worthy to be a leader in somebody else's eyes? Frank DeDominicis started as a young social activist and became a community change advocate. His work shifts cultures to high-performance organizations. Scott Scowcroft, owner of the Scott Treatment, uses his talent to find the untold story in video media. He takes your video and increases the content value by creating bite-sized clips, as well as distilling the video into a beginning, a middle, and an end to fully purpose the content in multiple ways. We'll be right back.
Welcome to the Voice of Bold Business, the show that provides everything smart leaders need to evaluate situations, build relationships, and create solutions. Jessica Dewell candidly talks about the skills necessary to build tenacity and do more with less. And now, here's Jessica.
Hey, Frank, when we're stressed, how does that actually affect our professional image?
Stress affects me in a unique way in that my first connection is with my clients and the public, my friends, the people. So I always think, what's in the best interest of my client? I know I'm under stress. I know my adrenaline load. Like, I can feel my brain chemistry. I'm sensitive to that. The first thing I think of when I know I'm physiologically under stress is, to borrow from 12 steps, is it hunger, anger, loneliness, tired? Is it something extraneous? Or is there really a practical issue in front of me? And if it is, do I need to put it aside and get some distance? Do I need to seek counsel? Or do I need to really confide in my public? Often I've been vulnerable to my audiences when I've gotten lost or been confused like anyone and asked for support. And that works for me.
Scott, when we're stressed, how does it affect our professional image?
Stress is a measurement of when we're out of our comfort zone. It's not so much the stress itself, but how we behave downstream from the stress. Stress can be a cruel mistress in two regards. It might be that we're able to mask who we really are underneath, but when we're under stress, that comes out. Our public image or professional image might be one way, but underneath, an angry person or a person who is spiteful or something, and under stress, that comes out. That's not good for our image. And then there's the other side, that would be performance. When we are under stress, we are showing our competency, or it might be that we're very competent, but under stress, we perform less well. So it masks the competency that we have. The goal then would be to figure out what our tolerances for stress are. On the behavior side, if we're not good people underneath, change who we are underneath so that when we expose ourselves under stress, it survives the daylight of being exposed. If we don't perform well under stress, then we can talk about this more later in the show, but what are the ways that we can remove stress so that our competency can shine through from there?
Thanks, Scott, and thanks, Frank. Those are really great answers. It's amazing how when we think, I love this, when we think we've finally conquered something, turns around and there's something brand new that gets in the way, or a different way we sabotage ourselves than we ever thought possible when we finally got rid of the thing we thought was holding us back. There are a couple of challenges that I have personally that affect me both though at home and at work and in every part of my life. Dealing with those things, facing those fears, recognizing that that is actually happening, what ends up coming up is what a lot of people would call coping habits. They are really good in the sense that to cope means what? To be able to handle enough to get through. However, it may not be a place where we can thrive and survive. And so I'm kind of anti-cope. However, sometimes we got to use that as the bridge, right? How do you know when somebody around you might be coping?
Falling back on something such as a past behavior or a self-defeating behavior?
If that's how you're taking it, yeah.
Yes, I just lost a friend who made bad decisions about how to cope with her life stress and losing her life just 6 weeks ago because of it. I had lost touch with this acquaintance several years ago, knew this person was dealing with life struggles, but did not reach out for support. Time went by, and only recently did I hear that they had fallen into a deep depression. Eventually, through a number of different substances, ending with fentanyl, the opioid, I don't know, maybe accidental overdose or suicide, I don't know. To go back to your question, we're unfortunately creatures of habit, and we learn our early values program very early in life by our early role models. What do they say? The behavioral psychology says 70-80% of our values programming happens in the first 6 years of our life based on our observation of our parents and those around us. We've learned ways of dealing with conflict. We've learned ways of dealing with relationship tension, either avoiding it or confronting it or maybe constructively dealing with it for some lucky few who have had loving, nurturing families. I don't mean that in a sarcastic way, but I do know families are like teams, team building. And on the bell curve, there are some that are so thick with love and bonding, you could feel it like pea soup when you walk into their house. Most other families have various degrees of interpersonal stress. I was the crybaby when I was young. That was why I'm one of 4 siblings. And that was my way of getting an extra cookie. And my siblings had other more sneakier ways of doing things, but I was manipulative and acted the victim. And I found that pouting is not really a conductive way to get things done at work. And it took me a bit of staring in the mirror, doing the mirror meditation, as it's called, to ask what's my second thought, what's my hidden motivations and bias. And I realized I just had a need for recognition. Now I found much healthier ways of seeking recognition, and that has affected my own personal coping, and it's given me more empathy for the various levels of skill and experience people either have, or some are fortunate enough to get education, counseling, and training, and learn some of the little gifts that are out there that help us to cope.
That takes a lot of courage to be able to look yourself in the mirror and stick with it until you find that hidden motivation. All I know is when I get rid of one habit and a new one pops up, I'm like, well, I noticed that. I'm not ready to deal yet, but at least I know you're there.
I follow me around every month and see what I'm up to, and I have a sit down with me once a month.
That's so cool. And that goes back to, I got rid of one bad habit. I used to be an emotional eater when I was stressed. And of course, that's all kinds of things. There's all kinds of repercussions that come from that because you're eating the wrong things at the wrong time and you're eating the right things, maybe never. It's all this concept. And then of course, not only do you not have fuel to actually go forward, you actually have all of the things of the crashing, like the sugar crashes or whatever else maybe.
You have the blood sugar, insulin balance. Yeah.
And then I went from that to just forgetting to eat. Usually I work right before our show, and I took a break right before our show here so that I could sit and eat food in a way that would make sure that I would be able to get through so I'm nice by the time I get home to dinner. Did you want to add to this part of the conversation, Scott?
Sure. You started off this part of the conversation, Jess, by disparaging coping, right?
I did disparage it because I'm not sure I like it so much.
I'm going to counter that, or perhaps a better way of phrasing it is, let me reframe it a little bit differently. Think of coping as neutral, much like you can think of as technology as neutral. It's not the coping, it's how you respond to coping or what coping you employ in what direction, especially in overcoming the early childhood training that Frank was referring to. There is the institution of mindfulness. Mindfulness is, to me at least, the ability in a situation, perhaps in a stressful situation, to be able to remove yourself from it intellectually, to be able to kind of step out of where you are and look back at yourself and respond by saying, how interesting that is. Another component of coping would be to breathe. So you're taking care of the intellectual side and then also the physical side because you have chemicals going through you when you're stressed. And between saying, gee, isn't that interesting, just observing it and breathing and perhaps some other exercises, then you'll be able to move on from there. And moving on from there might be choosing to reframe what the situation is. So instead of saying, why, you were just smiling. Why was that, Jess?
I was waiting for reframe to make it into the conversation.
Because you know that's what I was going to say? Or
I did. Yeah, I was waiting.
Okay, that's fine.
Here's something, Frank. The more you hang out with Scott and myself, the more you will know, as I am pretty much always an optimist. Scott has me beat in terms of optimism and how to look at things in a way that creates a positive light no matter what.
Figure of 8 here on the more terminal positives.
And everything we've heard from you are also very factual, very real, very honest. You always end with something positive also, Frank. So we're glad to have you part of this club.
Well, thank you. I didn't realize that about myself. I'm just babbling on here like I normally do.
We wouldn't have you on if you were just babbling. This I will tell you. I have a pretty high bar.
I know you do. You hang out with some intelligent people.
Scott, did you finish your answer before?
I don't think I could top myself from that, even if I can. It's your turn, Jess.
Oh, I'm happy to have it be my turn. Okay. Maybe I have a problem with the word coping because of my own personal experiences. I'll be completely honest with you. When somebody says, oh, you're just coping with that, boy, no, I really want to tackle it and have it be done. Which leads me to something that I heard in your initial answer, Frank, which is why I needed to write this down. My question is, how do you know if you have a practical issue or if it's just something surfacey that needs to be tackled?
By asking an observer, a dispassionate third party, to make observation of what is real. One college study I looked at said that of the things people worry about, only 8% of those are real problems. The rest are usually in the past or a few in the future. And then of that 8%, only half of those, 4 of those, involve the power or influence of others. So only 4% of the things we worry about in relation to this one study are practical problems we can do something about with the resources we have right now today. Oftentimes the emotionality, the pressure of problems, or maybe even my desire to look good on top of the problem itself is distracting. And I need my friend or coach to say, wait a minute, that's something that you can deal with in 4 weeks, or you can delegate that, or that's a read later issue. It's not as hot as you think.
Interesting. Okay. Because I get stuck in the moment. I love being in the moment. Whatever is happening is what excites me, or whatever is going on that's absolute true chaos is exactly where I think I'm supposed to be, which of course in itself can be a great big distraction. I know that's a double-edged sword of, oh, it's great to have shiny object syndrome because you never know what you're going to find and the possibilities are limitless. Yet on the other side, it can turn into an avoidance tactic is what I heard you say in terms of the outputs of that study you were referencing are.
These are things we worry about and put our mental time on, oftentimes distract us from solving the practical problem right now. And we're not aware of that. It's easy for us to be distracted by our impulse. But what I do, if I can just lend a little coping piece of my own.
Please.
Am I being coping shamed here?
Maybe just a little.
A little.
It's all good.
It's all good. We're friends now.
That's right. We call it all out on this show.
I look at the impulsiveness, you call it the attraction, the shiny object. Yeah, our addiction to excitement, to achievement, to good things, to joy, to positive feelings. And yes, that excitability is an important part of life, all those feelings. However, there's a quieter side to life that balances that impulsivity. And that's quiet, meditation, hermitage, poetry, music, whatever nurtures the soul. And I don't think, as Scott was saying in his first comment about competency, I don't think we're in our competence zone if we hang out in either one. If meditating all the time, then our brain waves go flat and we're very easily influenced. Information is easily programmed in a pre-hypnotic alpha mind state, as Scott probably knows, you probably know. And at the same time, too much excitability, I'm going to dip into another discipline, but too much emotional excitability affects the HPA, the hyperthyroid, pituitary adrenal gland axis, which triggers the pancreas, the liver, brain, and creates crisis signals. I think it's great to go to a rock show and scream your brains out, but I also think it's really cool to sit on a rock and look at a mountain because you're looking at the mountain and there's no meaning assigned to that moment. And anyway, I just want to summarize by saying those two ends of the spectrum for me help me to approach, forgive the word, cope in middle.
We've got a couple of words going on in terms of this definition right here, and I think we should call that. I like this phrase, the middle. And what I heard you say, Frank, is that sometimes coping keeps us in the middle. And then if I were to even go one step further, Scott, and bring in what you said earlier, reframing could bring us to the middle. Would I be accurate in bringing those two perspectives from your perspective together? We're talking about this place of in the middle, optimal. Balance, yeah.
Homeostasis, it's called physiologically, the state of well-being, of balance.
What do you think, Scott?
I've recently been reading about the concept that there are two realities. There's the abstract reality versus factual reality. In regard to the abstract reality, there are things that just don't exist in nature. Zero does not exist. You can't find it anywhere in nature. And yet zero helps us in terms of understanding who we are in our relationship with each other and with nature and those things that we encounter. That just shows that we're able to create our own reality, not entirely, but to some degree. In terms of reframing the situation, it can be that you can look at something a little bit differently and say, oh, okay, well, if I were to look at it differently, then that opens up a lot of possibilities that I was closed to before. That really works as long as you don't violate factual reality. So I might be walking along on a snowbank and I might be thinking, oh, this is really terrific. And I can reframe as much as I want to, but if I step into a crevice, I'm still going to be going down to the bottom and have to cope with that. So it's not an absolute. There is at least the opportunity to reframe, and one can only do that if there aren't those observations of the mind that cloud you from being able to do it. So if you're too angry, or if you're off the charts one way or the other, if on the other hand, you can find that homeostasis, presence of mind that Frank was talking about, then it becomes easier for you to be open to different possibilities.
How do you reframe or get into balance what's going on in front of you to decide, do I have a practical problem or not?
Maybe this would be a good time for a couple of stories. Jess interviewed Alan Cohen a while back, and he's an inspirational speaker and has wonderful insights. And one of the stories that he told was on the beaches of Hawaii, where he lives. He was on a horse, and the tour guide had suggested, well, let's go up to the top of that hill over there. Alan related going up, and it was just beautiful. He got to the top and he's looking out over the oceans, and then the guide said, well, let's take this other route down. And the other route down was only 1.5 feet or 2 feet wide and very steep. 3/4 of the way down, he was not enjoying the beautiful view. There was a blue sky, the sun was going, there were seagulls flying around, and he was terrified that this horse might fall off. And he looked down and he saw the waves crashing against the rocks, and he said to himself, what would happen if I absolutely positively knew for a fact that I was not going to fall over? And then he thought, oh, well, this horse does this 5 times a day. The horse knows what it's doing. I don't have to worry about it. And the more he reframed it, the more he went down that metaphorical path, the easier it was for him to enjoy the moment. And it turned out to be a peak experience.
Literally because he got to a peak?
Literally because he got to a peak.
I have a story which Scott has provoked of a climb that I did up the Delaware Water Gap in Pennsylvania, very steep from the parking lot. It was a series of chimney climbs. I was quite agile, a little monkey, and I kept climbing up, and I knew about mountain climbing. You never quite see the top until you get to the next ledge, then there's even more. So that kept me going and going until how high I was. But when I looked down in the parking lot, the people looked like bugs and the cars looked like little splotches of color. So I think I must have been, I don't know, 1,000 feet high, maybe. I'm not sure how high it was. I reached up over a boulder, and so far so good. And I grabbed this little bush at the base, and its roots were coming out from where it was planted between the rock, and I barely had enough balance. And I thought, I better just breathe for a second and get a grip, because I was doing this by braille. As you know, if you're a rock climber, it's always easier to go up than to come down. And I hadn't thought about that, of course, being impulsive. So as I reached up to this little bush, juniper bush, and pulled down, this lovely bee came and sat on my wrist and decided to inject me and sting me. Talk about mindfulness. I had the presence of mind to calm myself and not whack it or lose my balance or anything. I just watched them sting me. And then with the other hand, I came down smoothly and extinguished his life. And although I took that sting, normally what happens when a bee lands on you, you move. But some instinct in me overrode that impulsiveness. So the higher instinct was survival. Talk about a reframe. Instead of attacking the pest bothering me, survival was much more important than the pain of a temporary sting. And there's a metaphor in that too, as you can guess.
That actually turned out to be some structure, being able to rely on the training that you had and know that there was the right thing to do in this moment. And it became clear when you were able to pause or trust.
I think when one has constructed right values, they naturally feed right instincts under pressure. To take that to corporate boardroom, when you know you're going into a very heated pressure cooker, if you prepared yourself with right attitude, then you don't need to be selective about every little tactic and exchange that you have. And you can endure the heat of a high pressure corporate crucial dialogue, for example.
What if we physically just moved space? I remember when my son learned to crawl, we lived in this great place in North Bend, and we had a 100-foot drop off from our house, 100 feet down to river. And it was like 9 to 10% grade all the way down. And everybody was like, oh, you have a baby. This is going to be crazy. You've got to get a fence. And I was like, well, I don't want a fence. And so what are we going to do, right? What are we going to do? Because apparently we are putting our child at great risk. And it never bothered me until he actually started to walk. And he'd cross the yard, you'd see him walk up to this edge, and you can't see what's down this ledge and this edge. So one day, instead of freaking out, I actually walked up to the edge and I got down and I squatted down to what he could see. And from what he could see was a gentle rolling hill on that first step down. And so it's actually physically moving your body and changing perspective and saying, can I see this through a different lens? And by actually moving and doing something with your own body or mind so that we have the ability to get different perspective. And that's what we're talking about here. 3 different stories that articulate perspective. And the same is, I guess, more similar to the horse, but also similar to what you were talking about, Frank, in the sense of there was something that said, I don't have to be worried about this. I just have to know more. And right, there's that curiosity that comes up and being able to separate the emotion from the curiosity in that moment. And in a boardroom, what you're talking about, in a heated meeting, hiring somebody, just dealing with everyday conflict and drama at the office is that, I don't know, I'd say even keeledness that we're looking to, being able to seek more information. What can we read between the lines? What can we take away from that?
I think what you're describing is that balance. Yes, the thoughts are, what can I take away from that? And at the same time, not denying our feeling body, our emotional body, but not letting emotional storms control our thinking. We may be in an environment and difficult emotions may pass through, and it takes a bit of mindfulness to allow that to be, because sometimes, this is just my point of view, sometimes emotional states are not really attached to anything. We're just very biochemically complex creatures and can feel a range of feelings. And we have different triggers, sometimes unconscious triggers. So we may be in an environment where we're working on a practical problem and difficult feelings may pass through because of something someone said, just words, or even a text.
Yeah.
However, if we can rise above that and refocus on what the practical problem, process, focus is, then we could, in the future, minimize some of those negative feelings by being more results oriented and maybe not requiring some of the conversations that produce those negative feelings.
So how do we prepare? What do we do, and how do we prepare for ensuring that our competencies show up under stress instead of the things that trigger or sabotage us?
Scott, you want to take this?
Yeah, thank you. In fact, I think I actually have an answer for this. In all of these conversations, the stress is not in the object that we're talking about, the stress is within ourselves. And I was thinking about what stressful situations there are. And one that we have all experienced is learning how to drive a car, right? Because you go in and you've got a learner's permit. And the first time you're going, not just around the block, but on the highway, and you have to merge, you're in a very stressful situation. But the stress is not in the road, it's not in the car, it's not in the other people who are around you, it's not in the traffic, it's in your mind. But we all now drive every day and we merge onto highways all the time, and it is a stressless experience. The difference between the two is that we have practiced enough so that we have taken the stress out of the situation itself. And there are other examples as well. Airline pilots. What about public speaking? What about soldiers? In fact, soldiers are put into stressful situations so often that they've even got a term for it, and it's called stress inoculation. So that when they do find themselves in very, very difficult situations, they're able to perform almost on automatic because they've been through it so many times. And maybe it's a little bit of a balance, because without stress, it might be what Frank was referring to, that meditative state where you're just kind of flatlining it. So that middle ground is you're about ready to go on stage. You've got some butterflies in your stomach. You're a little bit nervous. People who do this all the time say, yeah, I've always got a little bit of nervousness before I step out on stage, but that makes me sharp. And I get out there and then that disappears and I'm in my zone.
That's correct. That's exactly how I feel when I take the big stage. I feel right before I hear my name and I come out like, oh shucks, where's the exit? Can I do the hamburger thing at the front door instead? Can I hand out the flyers? Why me? And then I face them, the others. And you're right, that desperation, the highly anxious butterflies all get in alignment and give me energy. And somehow, I don't know, maybe you've experienced this, Scott, but I feel like once I state my purpose and know the couple points I'm about to talk on, I don't even hear what I'm saying. It's kind of like speaking hypnosis. I just kind of flow, and examples and references and citations come out, and somehow I do a good job most of the time. But my audiences, my evaluations normally say, Frank's the most relaxed guy in the world. Just give him the microphone. In truth, I'm no different than anyone else. My body says, oh my God, it's one of me versus all of them looking at me, judging me. And I've heard an anthropologist say, it may go back to the primal brain, that we realize, gosh, there's one of me and there's 20, 40, 100 of them, and they all have teeth. And so, so the limbic brain probably is interpreted. That's just a theory. I did want to say thank you, Scott, for giving me the opportunity to hook on to that idea.
Oh, we're going to stick with emotions right now. We invite them to the table. They're all welcome, and some may pass through and some may hang around for a while. So when we find ourselves emotional, what's something that we could do to really make sure that we're recognizing that not the emotions aren't necessarily at the table, but they're starting to climb all over our lap, and maybe like in the Ghostbusters, they squirt their goo at you. Or maybe that's called slime you. I can't even say the phrase right.
Only here on the Voice of Bold Business are you going to hear that.
That's bold. That's bold, and I will try to answer. I'll try to answer in the most appropriate fashion.
Good luck.
Thanks. Yeah, I set the stage really easy for you. There's nothing but trapdoors along the way.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. I appreciate the challenge. I would say make friends with your irrational self and your rational self, because both live within you, within me, within all of us. And we'd be fools to deny that. Sure, we look good, we smell good, we dress good. And then there's the, thanks to Jung and those deep divers, we've come to the idea that there's also the opposite deep inside us, that chaotic, crazy kid who's never satisfied, or whatever what they call the pre-morbid personality is, whatever it was we were predominantly as a child. So without getting goo on oneself, I would say enjoy the passing of the feelings and savor those. Yes, some hang around. What do? I had a really bad feeling. I made a big mistake a few days ago, which resulted in me being late on a report for a client. And the holiday weekend came, and I was tossing and turning, thinking, oh, should I fix the problem? Should I call and take a reprimand? Should I call and practice what I preach and be transparent and figure out how to solve the problem? Should I hide and run away? So I decided to take the chicken route, and because it was the weekend, and I thought I would trust the relationship. And when I called this morning to see if it would be a reprimand or what it would be, I got, oh, I do that too. You're forgiven. It's just fine. The summary of this is neither path is the right choice to make for seeking that balance, but trusting one's instincts. My little self said, oh, Frankie's going to get spanked. He didn't do his homework, and he's going to call his client and get yelled at, and I'm going to hear, oh, what am I paying you for? And you imposter, the imposter syndrome, right? Instead, I got a strong feeling of bonding and commonality, and it's not cancer, it's not a nuclear bomb, it's just an error, and let's get past it. So to end on that note, I've learned more than ever to trust my instincts, and that they are self-protective, and I'll make the right decision so I don't end up with goo all over me.
Scott, I'm not sure how you can follow that.
I'm having images of Ghostbusters.
That's all it is. It's all Ghostbusters.
Take it, Scott.
This hardly rises to the occasion, but what I've written down is to forgive yourself, but to be humble.
Yes.
That there really is a distinction between positive and negative emotions too. It's not as if emotions are not neutral. They can be positive, negative, they can be constructive, they can be destructive. It can be too much of a good thing or not enough. I mean, it's a very complex, really complex, certainly beyond anything I think that we can easily comprehend. When you think about it, the whole matrix of emotions, how we feel about things, how we feel about each other, and so forth. And that's part of what life's path is all about. I mean, it's an intellectual, it's a spiritual, it's a physical journey that we're on. Part of the journey is to have emotions. If we were without emotions, well, we would be stoic, wouldn't we? It would be Bach all over again.
We have this nerve called the vagus nerve. It connects itself up and down your spine from your brain to every major organ in your body. And that particular nerve, when it is taxed, and it's taxed really for long periods of time, we forget. And so there's this new phrase that I keep, and it's not new, I'm sure, but this phrase, it's new to me. It's called, you tone your vagus nerve. Tone the vagus nerve. The concept of that is that it is regulating all of these things. And so something as simple as gratitudes every single day will tone that vagus nerve, and it will create an inner resilience just by that. Maybe breathing a little deeper or picking a breathing exercise is another piece, another something that can be done to tone that vagus nerve, to create resilience. So when we talk about resilience, which is really what we're talking about here, when we talk about our external or our internal perceptions, which we're going to get to a little bit more of that next, we have practices that we can do. Everything that's been shared here, when done with intention, when done with thoughtfulness and in kindness, we are able to increase our own personal resilience physically. And when we do that physically, even though what are we doing? Usually you think physical. Go do your push-ups and your jumping jacks and your weight training and your running and your yoga, and you're physically getting fit. That's true. But what I'm talking about physically is how all the pieces and the work and the effort of that exercise does, combined with that mental gratitude piece, that inner work that we do, combined with just providing support for our body in such a way that it can actually shake off stress, and we can reconnect with what we want, that our middle, and say, hey, we're not on one side, we're not on the other. Here's our middle right now. I got this. The reason I wanted to pause and put that right there, put that pin right there, is my next thought is that we need to explore, how do we build and keep a professional image? I mean, it's something we're doing with every action that we take. It's something that impedes or removes obstacles. So it'll create or remove obstacles for us along the way if we're not careful. And I think we really need to define self-image, because we've been talking about stress. Now we're talking a little bit about gratitude and personal resilience. So what is this thing called image, and how do we build it and keep it?
Well, you've mentioned two images, public image and self-image, and they're really two different things. I've learned what my public image is by listening to feedback from people for years and hearing the same adjectives. So now I know how I come across. Self-image is a bit different, however. Self-image is the image we have of ourselves. And the feeling we get from a positive self-image we call self-esteem. Self-image is made up of umpteen impressions. The subconscious never sleeps, right? So when you think trees, the subconscious librarian is checking out zillions of trees and leaves and branches we've seen all our life in a nanosecond, or so psychocybernetics teaches us. Self-image is an experience that we have of looking at ourselves and looking at three things: the way we see ourselves physically, as in bulimia, anorexia, people who see themselves completely differently than they really are. How do we see ourselves? What do we say to ourselves? What's our self-talk or affirmation, that jury, that noise box in our head that won't shut up? What do we say about ourselves? When we have a win, do we say, "Attaboy, Frank, just like you"? Or we do say, good enough? How do we talk to ourselves? Oftentimes we talk to ourselves in ways our worst enemies would not have the nerve to speak to us. We can be so hypercritical. And maybe that's a function of the fact that we know ourselves better than anyone else too. So it's the way we see ourselves, what we say to ourselves, but it's action. What do we do to ourselves? Do we express gratitude just for who we are? We do when we meet a good friend. Hey, Joe. Hey, Mary. Big hug, whatever. Do we wake up like that, excited that we're still here? I just learned that lesson a couple of weeks ago, visiting with my spry 98-year-old mother, who is intact and energetic and vibrant. And while I'm in a bit of a melancholy state, thinking, oh my God, thank you for one more day with Mom, or a week or a year or a month, whatever. I hope she makes it to 100. But meanwhile, her attitude is, when she wakes up, oh my God, I'm still here. When I heard her say that and heard the joy, I adopted that same attitude. I woke up this morning and opened my eyes and thought, I'm sleeping in a comfortable bed, and I don't have any crisis going on today, and I've got some good chores, and I live well, and I am just grateful to be alive. I really am. I know that's trite, but gratitude is a practice experience, and it's also, and this is for another discussion another time, I believe gratitude is the other side of the coin of forgiveness. And gratitude is incredibly innervating in terms of giving impulse to the things that are positive in your life that you desire. The things I'm most grateful for are expanding in my life, and I'm grateful for them as I see them expand. Thank you.
Jess has heard me say this a million times before, and it doesn't surprise me to hear that you are talking about gratitude in the way that you are, Frank. I feel that gratitude is an underrated human value. I hadn't really thought about forgiveness and gratitude being juxtaposition that way, but that is so true. And I almost feel as if gratitude, if you have gratitude that is turned inwardly, if you're grateful for your body, it's almost as if each of your cells receives that gratitude and then returns a thank you. And if there happened to be a problem, in your body before that, it's dissipated somehow. So much of what we're talking about today relates less to the Western mindset and more to the Eastern mindset, where they have energy flows and acupuncture works in a particular way. And it's not that one is better to the exclusion of the other, it's the balance between the two sides. But taken separately, each of them is imbalance, is not that bell curve that you talked about. And Jess, you were saying something about professional image.
I know, right? The whole title of the show.
How does this all relate? Oh my
Well,
God.
and this is cool because
Self-image is tied to public image.
Incredibly so. And that's one of the things when we're talking about image, we're talking about more than just one. I didn't say self-image. I didn't say professional image. I just said your image stressors, right? Image and image stressors. Now in your answer, I did ask for that professional image piece. So thanks for the interruption, letting me interrupt, Scott.
All I was going to say is that when you talk about professional image, that is in the eye of the beholder. You can send something out, but it is what the person is receiving is professional image. Well, at one level, you could have two different people, and your professional image is different because it's dependent on how they're receiving what you're sending out. However, what is common to both of them is that most people smell a rat a mile away. I mean, we have that expression and it says, oh yeah, that's true. And that even extends through video, so that during these video conferences that we have, we get to employ the wonderful ability that our brain has for facial recognition and body language and so forth. But even through podcasts, people hear the tonal part of our voice and you can just hear what's happening. So even though it's entirely dependent on the receiver in terms of what professional image that you have, it isn't as if you aren't heavily influencing that. And the more skillful you are in terms of communicating, so that you're overcoming the barrier of space, and if maybe time and space, you can project a more powerful professional image so as to get across the loss of signal or the increased noise that might be in that transmission. And people who have charisma, I think, may have been able to take this to a fine art where they are so powerful that all they have to do is to walk into the room and all of a sudden they own it. Now, how do they do that?
What I'm taking away from everything that you said is that we have some control. We have control over what we choose to portray, the actions that we choose to take, the way we choose to think. And then it's up to us to seek feedback to make sure what we think we're portraying is actually received on the other side. When there's a gap, that gives us something concrete to work on. Maybe we know how, maybe we don't know how. The point being is we can recognize the gap right there. What goes into our image? Our credibility, our integrity? Can people trust us? Do they believe what we say? Some of us out there, and I don't think the three of us fit this category, so I'm going to just preface it with that. Some of us, we are authentic to a fault. We get to the point where we use our, and I'm putting this in air quotes on purpose, authenticity to kind of be rude, not even kind of, to just plain be rude and mean. And I am a firm believer that we are all good inside. And so when somebody is authentically being themselves and they're rough, okay. But when they're going out of their way to make sure they're giving people black eyes along the way, not so cool anymore. Those are fine nuances of image. And the same could be true for laughter and nervousness. The same could be true for friendliness to oozing love in a unprofessional way or an inappropriate way for a situation, maybe.
Could I interject?
Please.
I think the point of kindliness is important to underscore here. Ever since Assertiveness 101 came about in the 60s and expanded, people who were non-assertive or didn't know what the separation was between assertiveness and aggressiveness would use that new skill they had of speaking their mind to let the clerk who was bagging their groceries wrong know how angry they were. So here we have people intoxicated with this new communication skill that allows them to ventilate without any intention of kindliness for the receiver. There's a second point I want to make, and I'm speaking from my own professional experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to sound arrogant. It happens so often with us seniors. But I look at the field of education and training and see many good people out there teaching, sharing good ideas, selling books, giving the recipes, the how-tos. That's not me. I believe that the client that I work with and the one that naturally vibrates on the same frequency has a certain kindliness about them in the way that we initially say hello, long before we talk about an agreement. And even after an agreement, I'm really letting you on the inside of how I do my work. Once I'm at that second base place where we're collaborating, I underscore that with different protocols and habits. When do you not like to be called? What are subjects we shouldn't broach? What are your limitations? What do you perceive as stressors that I should be aware of? So I try to be protective. There's something I learned from one of my teachers, Steve Milburn, a good friend, was always be interested in looking after the other person's interests more than they're capable of. That's kindliness. That's tying your little boy or little girl's shoelace before they trip. Well, the same thing in business. If we could just somehow divorce ourselves from our ego-driven self-interest, which runs most of us most of the time, unless we're aware and can make adjustments for that, then we don't really have as much acceleration towards real intimacy and connection. It's other concern. Scott, you were talking about charisma. It's the other concern that makes us attracted to other people, and not some big fat ego on stage screaming, "Buy my book."
So let's say, because the people listening to this will be like, we're not those people. And I would tend to agree with them. You're right. You're listening to this podcast. You're listening to this radio program. You're listening to this video stream. You are not like most people because you are here. You want to do business in a bold way. You want to have conversations and solve problems with purpose and thoughtfulness and kindliness. And with that, we're all human and we're all going to stick our foot in our mouths. And we're all going to fall down and we're all going to have image issues now and again. And so what would your advice, your thoughts, your maybe self-reflecting questions, whatever you have, be around repairing an image that has been broken from that perceiver side?
One never gets a second chance to make a bad first impression.
Do you get a second chance to make a good first impression?
I have had a chance to learn true humility from making a bad first impression from my own experience, painfully. And I knew that maxim that you don't get a second chance, because when you screw up the first time and then you show up the second time a nice guy, it's look at that who was so rude to me yesterday and now they're sucking up to me. So it makes it even more difficult. But at the same time, it makes it easier to be a chicken and run away from the thing that you need to confront, which is a need for humility, and probably one of the hardest things, particularly for those of us who are driven. However, I found that really seeking to really respect the value of other people, independent of whatever's going on in my head, my thoughts or my subjective perception of things, really helps to smooth the way.
At one point, Jess, you were talking about you're sending something out, but then it's your responsibility to listen back to see what was actually received. And if there's a gap between what you thought or what you wanted to send out and the reality of what you received, that's what you can work on in terms of bettering yourself. And yet that gap can only be recognized if you don't let your ego get in the way. You need to take, in the conventional use of the word ego, you have to set your ego aside so as to be able to appreciate the painful truth that's out there. And then once you've seen that, the next question is, and the then what is, I suppose, the humility, admitting that you're wrong and then making amends and then going on from there. At some point, I think we've talked during this last hour about self-forgiveness. Another one of my favorite themes is that there's a difference between guilt and regret. You can repair guilt. You can be guilty for something and then make reparations of some way. What you want to try and avoid, though, is regrets, because once you have a regret, there's nothing that you can do to repair that. maybe you can let time diminish regret. At the end of the day, just make sure that increasingly you're living your life in a way that minimizes the regret that you're going to have at the end of the day when you're on your deathbed and you look back and you say, gee, I wish I had spent one more day with my family and one less day at work, or vice versa. Gee, I wish I'd have been a little bit more industrious instead of spending so much time.
What makes it bold to recognize that we have stressors that affect our image?
What makes it bold is that just to say that would put you in a minority of people who say, I'm fine. That wonderful phrase that extinguishes any need for conversation. Bold in saying that I'm adventuresome and exploring ideas of getting past my own denial, number one. And number two, being willing to speak out in a safe, supportive environment about these things.
Almost by definition, stress is an admission of weakness, because were we to be up to the task, we wouldn't be stressed about it. We're only stressed because we're falling short. We're not perfect and we're not superhuman, at least most of us aren't. So we're going to inevitably be stressed about something. If we can recognize that and get over it and persevere regardless of the stress that we find, that might be the definition of courage. And at the end of the day, it might be heroic, because it isn't heroic for someone to go in and do something that is absolutely within their control, and the successful conclusion is a foregone conclusion. It's heroic when you overcome the uncertainty, the stress of the situation, and you persevere and hopefully prevail. And even if you don't prevail, it's even the effort to show the courage to try and do that that is so bold.
You will find program notes for Keep Image Stressors in Mind at voiceofboldbusiness.com/P153. That's voiceofboldbusiness.com/P for program 153. You can also search Keep Image Stressors in Mind right from the website. From gratitude to repairing an image, to recognizing the role of our emotions, to understanding what's practical and prioritize for not only our professional image, but our personal image, is what the topic was today. You have been there. You have your own stories, personal, professional. All of those experiences create the space for you to be the leader you are today, to look at it and to know, what else can I do to be a better leader tomorrow and be the best leader and step up into the shoes that we know we are here to fill in our roles within the lives that we've chosen. So rate this program, share your comment, tell your story, because it's what we do and how we do it and the practice of it that ensures our stress does not get in the way and we can keep image stressors in mind.
Subscribe at thevoiceofboldbusiness.com and get more information, program notes, and past episodes. Bold leaders approach each situation and focus on action to achieve a higher level of leadership. Jessica Dewell, your business advocate, is the host of the Voice of Bold Business Radio. Thank you for joining us.